Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, I'm joined by my guests, Richard Megson and Tony Hill from Complete ASAP. How are you doing, guys?
Really good. Thanks, David. Thank you for having us on.
It's
Very good, thanks.
always a pleasure to catch up with you guys. And this is interesting because it's a subject that takes up a lot of headline space because we're being told it's come down the line that changes are happening with material information. We've been told that for years. But finally, that time has come, and we all must comply. And luckily, there are a bunch of solutions out there that can help us do that. But I think it's probably fair to say that as an industry and as a collection of agents, we're still getting our head round as to how it's best to present this information, how it's best to gather this information, when to ask for it, and where our obligations sort of begin and end. So we're going to have a little bit of a sort of a Q&A on this, but as it's sort of a launch of your material information product, as it were, maybe Tony and Richard, you could give us some background as to how you conceived this.
Well, we launched our service couple of weeks ago. We've had a really good response since we launched. We've been speaking to our agents for some time, some of our clients, about the detail and the likely impact. So what we've launched is our solution, which will enable agents to keep compliant with the regulations, but also to minimize the disruption to their business. So in terms of our process, how agents engage with our service, it's all about customer journey. So our process internally has obviously changed. We're going to pull all the information together for the agent. So we've got data sets, we've got fulfillment of the PIQ, but it's all about keeping the process smooth, avoiding any sort of disruption to the agent where possible. But we're big supporters of the guidelines and material information. As a business, we've always been very pro people engaging with solicitors at the earliest point, ordering or getting information again at the earliest point. So we think material information is an opportunity for agents. We think it will streamline the process, and we think ultimately it will speed up transaction times, because providing information to buyers at the earliest point can only be a good thing.
It makes sense when you say it like that. And as agents, I know that the only thing that has stopped us from providing that extra information is there was a time when less was more, that we stayed away from saying anything that could possibly pin us down legally. We were very worried about misinformation and giving out other information. We also assumed that our sort of colleagues in the conveyancing side of the transaction would take care of a lot of that, which is fair to say that they do. But what we're talking about, really, the biggest change is that almost at the point of sale, so from the beginning of that property being marketed, the public have a right to know what it is that they're buying, and they have a right to have access to information that informs their decisions. So, Tony, I know that you've got a very strong conveyancing background. In terms of what this information now includes, I know we've got part A, B, and C. Do you want to give us an overview of what we can typically expect?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key bit, the part A, B, and C. Obviously, A was launched earlier and was relatively straightforward, council tax, asking prices, tenure. And when B and C came around, there was so much sort of furor that it was going to be really difficult. We were becoming pseudo lawyers, things like that. And I think, having read the actual guidance quite heavily now, part B is you should provide these things, and that is around property types. So is it detached, semi-detached, number of rooms, a lot of things that people are already doing and have been doing as a natural course of an agent for quite some time. The extra bits are probably the data sets that Richard's talking about, broadband speeds, mobile things. But I think Rightmove need even pull those through now automatically.
Yes, yeah.
So then it comes back to your PIQ and pulling in information. So utility suppliers, parking and things like that. So that the part B itself, which is a should, isn't actually a massive variation away from what a lot of agents already do. It's Part C that seems to frighten the life out of everybody because they think they have to check these things on every single deal. And that's not the case. You only need to highlight something if it affects the property. So if you're selling a property in central London, you're not looking for coastal erosion. If you're in an area that's not had a mining history, you're not looking for coal mining problems. So I think that's the bit where people have got concerned. So our view has been gather as much of the information as possible, present it to the buyers for them to have it looked at with a lawyer. We're not expecting a buyer to necessarily understand everything. You can't expect an estate agent to become a conveyancer overnight and start pulling pieces to bits. You know, we've worked in an industry where new builds have produced packs for buyers that have then been looked at by solicitors. Auction companies produce packs and present it. People read it before they make an offer. This isn't a whole stretch away from those things. It's just doing it in a different environment.
And I think just to clarify this for anybody watching, because it takes a while for these things to sink in, but this is absolutely compulsory. The law changed in November of 2023. You have to deal with this. It's not something that you can dodge.
Well, it wasn't a law. It's not a law change as such. It's a defined old law. So the Consumer Protection Regs is still the law that people are held accountable to in 2008. But they used the term in those regs, material information, which has been open to interpretation, being vague. People haven't really known what that's meant. So what trading standards have tried to do is define as much as they can what material information is to give agents guidance on if someone was to make a complaint, these are the sort of things that you should have looked at, you should have been presenting, and those complaints could be upheld against this information. It's not necessarily new law itself. It's just helping people understand the law that's been in situ since 2008.
I'm going to throw some frequently asked questions at you, and I know that you're going to love some of these, but there are things that we don't want to. Sometimes we don't want to highlight to a prospective buyer, and we're purposely coy about them, or we sort of skirt around the houses, if you'll excuse the expression. What does constitute the things that need to absolutely be disclosed, and how do you as an agent rationalize that? Is it simply just the test of try and put yourself in the shoes of a buyer, what would affect your decision? Is it open to interpretation, or are there guidelines that we can follow?
Well, the guidelines for trading standards are relatively clear if read. Obviously, there are things that people will dispute over what should I do, this, because I suppose if you're being down to the person, what's material to one person might not be material to another, and that's not what people are trying to catch you out on. It's material to the average buyer. So, you know, if someone might not want to buy somewhere because they can't park their van on a driveway, that's not the same as, you know, there's a new development going up in the area that you've not told anyone about, and they didn't want to travel 200 miles to view that property. And then they've found out about this. They've just wasted a 400-mile round trip. So it's things that would materially change somebody's point of view, not necessarily the minutiae. So I think you put yourself in your buyer's shoes to a point. You've got to look at, if you were going to view a property, if you were looking to buy a property, what are the material things that would change your mind? You know.
So if my next door neighbour gets up very early every Saturday morning and starts cutting his lawn very loudly, not necessarily going to affect everybody's decision. Those aren't the sort of those minor things aren't the sort of things that people want to know about.
No, I don't think so, because I suppose if you look at that, you might have a dispute with your neighbour because you two don't get on. The minute you move out and someone else moves in, they might get on with that neighbour fine. So unless that neighbour is, you know, under sort of orders of police for fly tipping and music at 3 a.m, that sort of, there's different levels, isn't there, of what you should present. I mean, if you know that there is a problematic person living next door and that isn't based on a personality clash, it is because they are genuinely a terrible neighbour, then yeah, you would have to disclose that.
And that's always been the case, isn't it, really, with those forms anyway? It will always come out with, in the conveyancing process, you're asked, are there any unresolved disputes? And when you have to sort of kind of verify who's got control over which boundary and who's responsible for what. So I suppose it's better that this comes out earlier. So to sort of ask you a question, which is going to maybe sound daft at first, but this isn't just obligation. This isn't just sort of more regulation and compliance. This is something that we can actually turn into a benefit for an agent as well, because presumably by being more upfront with things, what we know from the auction industry and what we know from other industries that provide buyer packs is that it does speed up transaction times and it can avoid fall throughs as well. I'm presuming that's what you're feeling and you're hoping will translate through as a benefit to the agents.
Well, that's our approach to it, David. I mean, the compliance has been there for years, and people will ultimately do what they feel they need to do as a business. We advocate doing it for the benefits that it brings, as well as being compliant. Because, you know, as an ex-conveyancer myself, the amount of deals that I would have gone through, and I maybe have got to sort of week 7 or 8, and then I've spoke to my client and said, oh, you know, here's all the restrictions on things. You can't build an extension without getting consent from someone. Oh, I only wanted to buy this property because I wanted to stick a 2-story extension on it. I'm walking away. Now, if they'd had that on day one, that deal maybe wouldn't have been put together. The estate agent, the conveyancer, the surveyor, everybody, nobody's wasted time and nobody's wasted money. And in an industry where no sale, no fee is the prevalent model, the amount of time that is spent on fall throughs and the money that is wasted is significant. So the more we can do to minimize those things as an industry, I think is got to be beneficial.
And a lot of agents watching this now know that they need to deal with it and they need to deal with it early. So my question to you is, in our processes, how early should we be gathering this information? And more importantly, is it going to slow us down in any way? Because we all know that at the beginning of that sort of relationship with a vendor, they just want to see those pretty pictures online on Rightmove or wherever it is that you advertise. But that's what they want to see. And they want you to go from instruction to getting the property live as quickly as possible. And in fact, over the years, people used to be quite patient because they used to realize, I'm going back to the days when you used to have to develop the photos, get them back, put them on the details. But these days, obviously modern technology, but also management of modern expectations, we all expect everything sort of today and instantly. Is this going to then slow them down? Is it going to be that kind of passion killer to the initial instruction Ferrari, or is there a way to sort of deliver this quickly?
Well, we've been working with, we launched nationally a couple of weeks ago, but we've been working with our existing agents for well over a month now. So we're live as such, and we've seen a level of client engagement that we didn't necessarily expect. But I think in terms of when you put a property on the market, there are certain onboarding things that you're required to do. AML, photography, floor plans, EPCs if you require one. This is just another thing that needs to be done. And it is the law, to repeat the point. But our experience is clients are engaged, as I've said, and we're sending out the PIQ electronically. And they're coming back within a day or two. So our observation so far is no disruption. And it really shouldn't slow things down. But the agent's got a responsibility to point out their obligations and the obligations of the client. So the client needs to be engaged straight away. And our experience so far, and a reasonable number of packs have been done, is that is the case.
So in terms of people who are interested in checking up that this has been done, and we know that not all agents, and this is every time we introduce a change to the industry, not everybody adopts it early on and not everybody adopts it fully. But good agents do. The agents that follow best practice do. And I know that that's the audience that we're talking to today. So I know that they'll be up on it. There will be some agents obviously not doing it, but ultimately, who checks whether or not it's been done? Who regulates it?
Well, at the moment, obviously, trading standards are the body around this, and my understanding from the webinars I've been on and speaking to them is that it's being devolved down to a local level. However, it's not necessarily going to be them going around looking to police. Ultimately, if a buyer makes a complaint to trading standards about misrepresentation, misinformation, they have to look into it and they will have to deal with it as is, as has been the case prior to this material information being defined. Over time, obviously, things will alter, the portals will change how you can present information. So it'll become more obvious, I think, when people are not doing what they should be doing. And therefore, it'll be easier for people to police. But I go back to, there's that side of it from the compliance. Ultimately, I think the agents that adopt this and move it forward will actually start to gain better market share due to better professionalism, better results off the back of it. They will actually start to stand out from the crowd, and people will end up following more from seeing the benefits of this rather than the risk of having their wrist slapped, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can see from a buyer's point of view how this is going to make things more straightforward, or at least seem more transparent. And I think that helps us with our reputation as an industry as a whole. By being as transparent as possible, there are very few industries that follow the amount of sort of regulation that we have to. But now being sort of owning that, putting it front and center at the beginning of a transaction, that when you come along to an agent, there will be disclosure of this information and you can make up your own minds. But I suppose the question that comes out of that, some people may assume that will then replace the role of a solicitor or a surveyor. That's not the case, is it?
No. I mean, going back to the sort of conveyancing side of things, there's far more to it than a few bits of material information. I know not every agent thinks conveyancers have to do as much as they do, and it's more administrative, but there is a lot of law that sits behind the sort of process that they go through. So regardless of the information passed forward, it will still be interpreted, still inquiries be raised on it and everything else that it comes to do. But if you think of conveyancing a bit like a tennis match, a buyer's solicitor can only start raising inquiries once they've received the information. So if we're collating that earlier, that's being presented earlier, that part of the process starts earlier. The more information you can provide them, the less inquiries will need to be raised, therefore shortening that period of the conveyancing process. So it all logically sits in that way. We're not saying that material information will stop people having to ask questions or stop interpreting, but what it's supposed to do is give a buyer enough information before they make an offer, before they spend their money, before they drive a huge distance to view a property. They need to be able to make an informed decision at that point. It's not saying that once they've made an offer that there's no way it could fall through, because obviously you haven't covered everything, but it will certainly reduce fall throughs because there will be things like restrictive covenants and things that they can now see at the beginning that they wouldn't maybe be told by a conveyancer for quite some time. So, I mean, I've not been in conveyancing for quite some time now, but I know that the models that are out there, they work differently. Some conveyancers will report when they're raising inquiries and give their client a lot of information early. Others will do an entire job and only pass this information to their client on week 12, at which point that client's going, hang on a second, that don't fit with what I wanted to do, that doesn't fit. And then that's why you get these late in the day extra inquiries raised, fall throughs, and that frustrate the life out of everybody involved. So again, the more you can push that forward, the better for everyone.
We did have a question that was asked by an agent, and it's something along the lines of this, that obviously it makes sense to get this done at the beginning of a marketing process. Marketing processes can take time. There's some properties that are going to sit on the market for a while. There'll be things that you agree a sale on and then they fall through. Do we have to redo it at some point later on down the line? Do you need to ask the questions again of the vendor before accepting an offer? Or is that overkill? Do you just do it well and once at the beginning?
I think if you do it well and once, and then a simple check-in to say, obviously you answered these questions for us previously, just making sure nothing's changed. I wouldn't necessarily drop an entire form back in front of somebody. You could ask them to review it and confirm. But I mean, talking about the way we operate, because it's a digital operation that effectively presents a PIQ for agents and then the TA forms for lawyers, the customer only has to fill it in once. But any amendment that needs to be made is very simple. They can log back in and amend an area rather than having to start it and do the full thing again. So that is something that I suppose it depends how much time's passed. I think you'd have to clarify, not necessarily get them to start again.
And I'm assuming if you have lost a sale, there will be things that may have come out in the survey process or in negotiation or at that point that you then need to sort of take on board, and then that becomes part of your material information as well.
It does, yeah. You know, as an example, you know, if it came out in survey that there was an issue with the foundations of a property, you would have to make that aware to people. But again, would you work with your vendor first? Would you want to remarket that property with the view of it failing again and again and again? You know,
there's
no point. So it's about getting it right and making sure that a sale's not about getting an offer, is it? It's about getting it sold. You only get paid when it all goes through to the end.
So I know that you guys have been having great feedback from your clients who've trusted your service for years and used it in various different guises, and now obviously this is a new enhancement to that. For agents that haven't dealt with you previously, what's the best way to sort of get in touch and sort of learn more about how you can help them?
Well, we can give out our emails, mobile numbers. You know, be delighted to speak to agents about our solution. You know, we've spoken to lots of our agents who've used this for a number of years. What's very clear is there will be early adopters. I still think there's a big education piece that's required, but you know, as we work through this, you know, we will be publishing our stats, and I think you know, we work with agents that adopt a similar approach and have been doing for the last year and a half, whereby solicitors are engaged far earlier. That their vendors are genuinely legally ready to move when an offer comes in, and we can see the stats. So this will become less about compliance, which is obviously a given because it's the law, but more about a commercial imperative, because it will benefit the agents, it will benefit the clients. Transactions will go through quicker and there'll be less fall throughs. So yeah, so I mean, if I'm allowed to give it out, my email address is rmegson@completeasap. And again, we'd be delighted to speak to agents about our approach. Having been working with agents on this for probably about a month now, we can see the sort of pain point for the agent will be the fulfillment of the PIQ. Because if you sell a number of houses every month, there's got to be a consistent approach to this. Every instruction, every file opening has got to be or follow the same process.
Yeah.
So that's where we think we can help. I think pulling data together is not going to be overly onerous, but I think the fulfillment of the PIQ, making sure that it's completed, supporting clients to get it completed, and get it back and out to instructed solicitors will be something we can help agents and their clients with. We talked about customer journey. One of the pain in the necks for clients is AML, and it's going to be compliant material information. So we're focusing on a process that pulls the two things together. The client can do AML and material information, or the PIQ, following the same link, and they'll only need to do it once. So the solicitors we work with will accept the AML that we do. So they're only doing these things once. And for the customer, that is a big benefit, because having to fill things in multiple times will hack them off.
And I suppose it makes for a more robust and well-rounded sort of onboarding process. The client themselves feels they're getting some value up front. They're getting, it's thorough. When you onboard with a solicitor, you need to provide all of this information up front. You very much feel that you're part of that process and you're vested in it. In the old days with a state agency, where we just used to say, sign on this bit of paper and you're on your way, that it now feels like we're actually sort of taking care of the client, and we're delivering value from the minute we begin with that AML. So I think the client feels more invested in the process. You as an agent feel, Tony, you made a really good point. We live in an industry where it's mostly no sale, no fee. And the agent carries that transaction and that client relationship at their own risk all the way through to exchange and completion. And so having a client that's focused and invested in the process is something that we all want to feel early on. And I think if somebody doesn't want to fill in this information, they don't want to engage, they're not willing to do AML, or simply put, you've not got a client that's particularly given themselves to the sales process.
Yeah, I mean, engaging with the client at this level, at the earliest point, will actually give an indication of, how motivated the vendor is, how motivated the buyer is when the information comes through. So it's a really positive thing. And our experience over 9 years of material information is probably going to accelerate things. It will improve things. There's no doubt, and we're not apologetic for saying so.
Fantastic. Well, they're very friendly, helpful people at ASAP. There are links below this post so you can get in touch with them fairly easily. Richard, Tony, thank you very much for your time.
Cheers, David.